The Galactic Empire had conquered thousands of worlds, crushing civilizations under the weight of their technological superiority. Their fleets, armed with plasma cannons and antimatter warheads, had never met an enemy they could not obliterate. Tartarus, was supposed to be no different. A minor human colony, barely worth the Empire's attention. The conquest was expected to be swift, another footnote in their ever-expanding dominion. The Empire's grand strategists reviewed the intelligence reports with amusement. Projectile weapons? How quaint! Grand strategist Zelvar's mandibles clicked in disdain as he scrolled through the data. These creatures still use solid munitions. Kinetic cannons. It's almost adorable. The other officers chuckled, their bioluminescent eyes flashing with amusement. Humanity was a young species, barely a century into interstellar travel. Their reliance on ancient artillery was laughable. Against the Empire's energy shields and gravity-based dampeners, such crude weapons were irrelevant. Deploy the orbital fleet. Standard intimidation protocols, Zelvar commanded, waving a dismissive claw. Give them one chance to surrender. If they resist, erase them. The Imperial Armada arrived in Tartarus IV's orbit like an eclipse of doom. Warships, each the size of a city, hovered over the colony, their cannons primed. The Empire's ultimatum was transmitted across all frequencies, a cold and impersonal declaration. This is the will of the Galactic Empire. Your world belongs to us. Surrender and be spared. Resist, and you will be nothing more than debris. The response came swiftly. A single transmission, human voices laced with defiance. Come and take it. The Empire laughed. It was the same stubbornness they had encountered in countless other primitive species. A futile gesture. Their ships descended, confident that within hours, the colony would be reduced to dust. No defensive energy barriers. No advanced planetary railguns. Just a scattering of metal tubes on wheeled platforms. Zelvar scoffed. This won't even be a battle. It will be a... A sound interrupted him. A distant, rhythmic thunder. Something the Empire had never heard before. A mechanical growl, ancient yet menacing. The ground forces were deploying, but something was wrong. The air itself seemed to ripple. Then the first shell hit. The first explosion tore through the lead dropship before anyone in the Imperial fleet understood what was happening. A moment ago, they had been descending in perfect formation. Now, a burning husk of twisted metal was plummeting toward the ground. The fleet hesitated. Their shields were active. Their armor was reinforced against energy weapons. Yet something had just ripped through their defenses like they were nothing. A second impact. Then a third. Shockwaves rippled through the battlefield as more shells screamed through the atmosphere, each one slamming into Imperial ships with devastating precision. The sky, once filled with the orderly descent of warships, was now a chaotic storm of fire and debris. On the surface, human soldiers worked in perfect synchronization, loading and firing their weapons with mechanical efficiency. The M777 Howitzer, an artillery piece designed centuries ago, had been given a new lease on life. Upgraded with advanced targeting algorithms, reinforced barrels, and ammunition designed for interstellar warfare, it was the last thing the Empire had expected. The enemy's technology relied on energy dispersion, assuming all attacks would come in the form of plasma or laser-based weaponry. But the howitzers didn't fire beams of light. They launched solid projectiles at speeds no shield was designed to counter. Each shell was a masterpiece of human ingenuity, armor-piercing, self-guided, and moving so fast that impact alone was enough to vaporize entire sections of enemy hulls. A group of Imperial skirmishers broke through the bombardment, landing in a clearing outside the colony. Their towering, insectoid frames shimmered under their adaptive camouflage as they prepared to sweep the area. Before they could react, another round was fired, not at them, but at the ground ahead. The impact wasn't just an explosion, it was a calculated demolition of terrain. The sheer concussive force sent the invaders tumbling, their exoskeletons cracking from the shockwave. The artillery crews didn't pause. Each team worked with machine-like precision, adjusting for range, wind speed, and the movement of enemy forces. One officer, watching the battle unfold from an underground command post, couldn't help but smirk. They mocked us for keeping these old relics around. Let's see them laugh now. The Empire had planned for a swift invasion, not a prolonged war. Their fleets weren't designed for planetary sieges. Their forces relied on overwhelming firepower, not endurance. And now, they were in the worst possible position, on the ground, exposed, and facing an enemy that had spent centuries perfecting the art of artillery warfare. The sky was no longer theirs. The ground was turning into a killing field. And the humans were just getting started. The battlefield was a nightmare of fire and debris. What had started as a confident invasion was now a desperate struggle for survival. The once mighty Imperial fleet was in shambles, its sleek warships reduced to burning wrecks. Every attempt to regroup was met with another thunderous barrage, tearing through their formations before they could adapt. The Empire's commanders scrambled to make sense of the disaster. Their shields were ineffective. Their countermeasures were useless. Their soldiers, trained for direct energy-based warfare, had no defense against the relentless storm of kinetic destruction. Grand Strategist Zelvar watched in horror as yet another capital ship was struck mid-maneuver. The shell punched through its reinforced hull like paper, detonating deep inside. A brilliant explosion erupted from the core, sending molten fragments raining down on the battlefield below. "This is impossible," he hissed. "How are they calculating our movements so quickly?" The answer was simple. Humanity had spent centuries mastering the art of indirect fire. Their artillery teams didn't need line of sight. They could predict exactly where an enemy would be before they got there. While the Empire relied on energy-based precision strikes, the humans had perfected the science of raining death from beyond the horizon. Another barrage fired in unison. The shells arced high into the sky, almost slow and graceful in their ascent. But when they fell, they struck with the force of meteors. A warship attempting to escape the chaos was torn in half before it could break orbit. A battalion of ground troops disintegrated before they could even register the incoming impact. Panic set in. The once disciplined Empire forces now scrambled for cover, but there was none. No structure, no energy field, no defensive maneuver could stop the relentless assault. The battlefield had become a place where movement meant death, and hesitation meant annihilation. Zelvar's voice crackled over the command network, demanding evasive maneuvers. But his officers were no longer responding with confidence. Their formations were broken, their ships burning, their forces shattered. A final barrage was prepared. The humans had pinpointed the command cruiser, the nerve center of the invasion. The calculations were perfect. The wind, the planetary rotation, the movement of the fleet, all accounted for. The shells were loaded, aimed, and fired in one synchronized motion. They hit like judgment itself. The first round obliterated the ship's primary thrusters. The second tore through its hull, setting off cascading explosions. The third found the bridge. Zelvar's last moment was spent in stunned silence as the world around him erupted in flames. Leaderless, broken, and terrified, the remaining Imperial forces did the only thing left to them. They ran. The battlefield was silent except for the crackling of fires and the distant echoes of collapsing wreckage. What remained of the once mighty Imperial fleet was now scattered ruins, littering the landscape of Tartarus IV. Smoke curled into the sky, carrying the scent of scorched metal and the unmistakable stench of defeat. Among the wreckage, human soldiers moved with a steady confidence, securing the battlefield. They had faced the Empire's arrogance, their so-called unstoppable technology, and shattered it with weapons the enemy had dismissed as obsolete. The Howitzers, still standing, were no longer relics, they were legends. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The Empire, undefeated for centuries, had suffered a catastrophic loss to a species they had barely considered a threat. Military analysts scrambled for explanations, searching for excuses. Some blamed tactical errors. Others whispered of espionage. But none could deny the truth. Humanity had rewritten the rules of warfare. The surviving Imperial officers, those fortunate enough to flee, delivered their reports with shaken voices. They spoke of artillery shells that defied all logic, of shields that failed against simple kinetic force, of an enemy that turned outdated technology into something unstoppable. Among the high-ranking officials of the Empire, there was no laughter now. There was only unease. Humanity, a species they had mocked, had done the unthinkable. They had taken one of the Empire's greatest fleets and ground it into dust. If they could do this with artillery, what else were they capable of? On Tartarus IV, Colonel Ethan Hayes stood before a live broadcast, sending a message to the stars. His voice was calm, but his words carried the weight of an undeniable truth. You thought we were primitive. You thought we were weak. You thought your technology made you invincible. But you forgot something. He gestured toward the burning wreckage of the Imperial fleet. Physics doesn't care about arrogance. And neither do we. The message was received across every corner of the Empire, where the once unshakable confidence of its rulers began to crack. The war was far from over, but for the first time in their history, the Galactic Empire had learned what it meant to fear.